blog because it's amazing. I did it this morning, which is led and edited by Mary.
I'm on the editorial collective, so I'm one of the editors.
Yeah, so the floor is yours.
Greetings, everyone. I'm going to try to move kind of quickly because what I have on this paper here is a little longer than the amount of time I'd like to spend. So if I'm speaking too quickly for you, please just indicate to me and I'll slow down. The title that I presented for this talk was Populism, Antipopulism, and the Construction of the People in Hungary. And this title reflects the decision to give a presentation that really has two distinct parts, which I think will interweave by the end. So the first will address the way in which labeling other actors populist functions today to legitimate a form of governance that is common in the neoliberal post-socialist era. By uncovering the work of liberal anti-populism, I hope to clear our vision for a deeper view of problems of democracy faced not just in Hungary, but more broadly in what Chantal Mouffe calls the post-political moment, and to make visible aspects of the struggle over the definition of the people as related to processes of class formation under historical conditions. In the second part, I will draw on historical and contemporary practices and ideologies of the Hungarian folk movement to address questions of how the people is constructed in relationship to senses and sensibilities concerning Hungarianness and citizenship by populists at particular historical conjunctures. The term populism, we've gone over much of this earlier, but I'm just going to repeat it. The term populism has recently been used to point to a diverse set of contemporary political actors and parties, from Trump to Syriza, from Orbán to Chavez. When unspecified, the term most often points to the ethno-national right, yet it also gestures toward the specter of new leftist formations. Scholars in the last decades have come to agree that populism can be understood as a style or logic that constructs an opposition between the elite or power and the people or underdog. This style, they agree, can be used by politicians located on any part of the political spectrum. There are disagreements too, of course. I want to speak about another logic or style. Drawing on the contributions of Agnes Gagyi and the Helyzet Public Sociology Working Group in Hungary, I want to bring to the surface the ideological work of what I shall call here liberal anti-populism, the pointing at a political actor, party, or less often these days, movement with the accusation, populists. The contemporary preponderance of accusations of populists has to do with the condition which Chantal Mouffe calls the post-political, which has arisen in the neoliberal era. Mouffe is the co-author and partner of the recently deceased Ernesto Laclau, whose 2005 book, Unpopulist Reason, did much work towards the agreed-upon definition standard as of today of populism as a style or logic. She has worked closely with Íñigo Errejón of Podemos to formulate a left populism recently. Mouffe argues that the widespread use of populist logic today is an effect of the post-political condition marked by a tendency towards a consensus at the middle that suggests that with the disappearance of the adversarial model of politics, democracy has become more mature and antagonisms have been overcome. This consensus, seen in third-way socialism of Giddens and Blair, and the incapability of this kind of social democracy to resist a center-right line vis-à-vis banks, austerity, democracy, a governing by experts who say that what citizens want cannot be done. So now I'd like to hone in on Eastern Europe and specifically Hungary to show how what people are calling populism today emerged from this post-political condition and how it relates to discuss post-political to arrive at the Francis claim that we have reached the end of history. The moment in which Margaret Thatcher's "there is no alternative" could be said to come true. The end of state socialists in Eastern Europe had global effects. Communism was no longer an option. This precipitated a crisis of confidence and crisis of the socialist condition. For now marked as backwards, left behind, expected to catch up to a neoliberalizing capitalist Europe. The embrace of electoral politics and civil society is the key section of the characterizing and it's a company governance. Kind of a colleague of mine who I was recently in a museum with Chicago School in that when he was there, this key center of theory and policy making gestured towards leftist movements, often called populist movements in Latin America, where the United States has its hand heavily, that the hands of the people must be kept off the levers of the economy. Support for democracy in Eastern Europe was inspired quite clearly by the political and social citizen socialism. Expected that there would be enhanced civil rights, democratic regime. In Hungary, the liberal, which was the majority out of the 5 in 1980, a majority more than once, Fidesz's so-intimate coalition up until recently, adopted an attitude of distance from regular citizens who understandingly expected their voices to be heard. That was, after all, what democracy was supposed to mean, that the public has shown anti-plate to be a post-democratic, honed by, from a position claimed to be so-called politics interests of it, and treated concerns of citizens with this form of rule are completely understandable. At the conjuncture of the end of state socialism, the rise of neoliberalism, and the convergence at the center, they are experiencing that cemented by arguments of their inferiorities and position system moves at the governing case. Fidesz took advantage of this experience of the post-political, wielding a reference to a cosmopolitan the nation, which had been in circles to the original ideas. Fidesz did this was by applying that conflation of people and nation in reference to the 1.2 million over the Hungarians, Pennsylvania, the Treaty of Trianon. Across the spectrum in regard to assimilation against this minority in Romania as well as a few other countries, Fidesz demanded that dual citizenship be granted and painted the liberal and left approaches as callous. Although the reference that Fidesz support failed because now legislative majority into the passive dual 2014, 11% of votes non-domestic. There's speculation about how in the next. Although it is Fidesz, political and policy as in or leftist lines, formal work of politicians, oligarchs, government, and re-instrumentalize institutions. Fidesz is, however, in time to note that for long contribute the wealth democratic need is with the communists. So many experiences Fidesz that be benefiting in this post of Hungary, where how post-socialists come together to inform a specific variant, and also how populism, theological work, particular studies, whose that type of governing, which was legitimized up until recently, and many people would continue to legitimize, has contributed quite clearly to a disparity of wealth not seen since the Great Depression. This situation is not unique to Hungary, where the so-called populist right party holds sway, and where its greatest challenger at present seems to be from the right, with the Jobbik party. Slower. Precisely because of its claim to be anti-systemic. So Jobbik is making the same claim that Fidesz made. We can see that work in the so-called country in Southern Europe, and their reaction today to the post-socialist neoliberal era, steering attention away from the problems of democracy under post-political conditions. At the time of my deepest and longest term, and was in opposition in 2000. The right word was already Fidesz, and a visible and loud minority identified with the far-right party of the 1940s. These actions and their key actors received praise with the right after state socialism that are formed via the practices central. I'm just going to refer to them as central practices, and I'm going to describe those practices to you now. So, is an associational form. The word dance house to the dance house, and it's the event. The Monday event in a particular location is hosted by a particular band. The rediscovery of traditional dance music was one element that sparked the movement in the Third, dance. The rediscovery of a certain order by folk ensemble choreographers in the 1970s was the other major spark of the revival, allowing now a much since 1990, most as I'll sympathize or empathize with these show and tell, where villagers who might be in Budapest for one or another reason, and there was actually an influx of Transylvanians as but also at least at the camps. That's part of the authenticity production. Next, over time, people then develop a reputation differentiated. So there's a different kind of, and therefore conversation is was potentially changing historically across time. Of bodies and senses and sensibilities which are formed on, in part, on the conversations that would happen over time, which are brought in to the association. Work, I was also conducting interviews and archival research, and that revealed the contributions of were actually developed by interwar populists, and I'll talk about them in a minute, but they were revived in the dance house. So in order to get a sense of the... So it's passing from 1920 until the mid-1940s, sought to preserve as much of their The second pushed for cultural validation, which was, especially in small War I Hungary, reduced. When people talk about the populace of the were involved in a fiery debate about the desired direction of the country. A rural background, to be ethnic Hungarian as a mother tongue. The people, government of gentry, while they also weave together a third group, which was made up in 1924 and estimated to appear much more like so while the governments of the Horde emerged from the anti-fascist had
turn to Estonians and
like the Soviets.
Was there at the same time
unions who in Hungary each had their own cultural and they say, oh, this is much more interesting to us. To other ethnochoreologists in Romania, restriction that
a contradiction between at least your first and your third part of your paper. Second, and particularly in your third, in a new form. Maybe you
can as tightly edit this as I would like to about Fidesz and populism, precisely because of with our bodies that are, you know, pre-political, you could say. Today is populism or not. So that was problematic because it's not Germany, right? So it has a different. Precisely why I wanted to take apart. I don't, because of this crisis of legitimacy, parallels but differences. That people live beyond the nation state all of the time, a real place of possibility.
I'm not to say that there never was populism before, used to have, and a neoliberal
populism.